get with here. Another excuse to do this at first. So well. What is up? Let's mention it to another thing.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Inside of the room, there is an attendance sheet that will be circulating. For those of you online, I will actually take attendance virtually as you are there. And just excited to have everyone join us this morning for this seminar. In April, one of my childhood friends was released from the hospital only to find out that her mom was in the hospital the same time that she was, and later on she passed, like that same day. There was no insurance, there was no money in the checking account, no money in the savings account. All she had was calls to family and friends with the plea to donate to have her mother buried while she struggled through the grief that her mom was gone. So sisters and brothers, I'm excited that you have taken a deliberate and intentional step to learn about planning ahead for when our good God calls us to that final resting place away from earth and to reside with him. It is a truth in our lives that we will come to fruition. That's going to come to fruition. But the time is right now to not lose sight of the preparations for that time so that our loved ones will not have to endure the grief and financial burden of caring for our homegoing simultaneously. So Titus 2 sees it an honor to offer this session so that you can get the information you need to plan and live your legacy now. And I'm Tracy Dunn. I welcome you to our session. Guests, thank you for coming. Our bathrooms are back towards the main entrance of the other end of the church. Those that are virtual, please join in the conversation. We're excited to have the space this time where you can actually come off mute and to ask questions throughout the session. I want you all to be relaxed, even though this can seem like a very tight conversation, and it's kind of like a burden. We put it off to the side, but in our community, we really need to plan for what's going to happen. And so I'm excited to have back our speaker, Maurice Smith, who will share timeless truths, you all, about what we can do today to plan for tomorrow. He's a family friend to Bobby and I, but more importantly, he's a man of God that serves humbly and unselfishly to others. So after our very own Pastor Harris comes up to give us a prayer and time of learning and that shares about our spiritual legacy, we will be blessed with the knowledgeable words of Maurice on Living Our Legacy, Part 2. Amen.
Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We praise God for this opportunity to come and to share, and we're looking forward to hearing more from our brother Maurice today on such an important topic. So if you will, let's pray that the Lord will bless us as we dig into this topic this morning. Father, we come and we give you the honor and the praise again for new mercies this morning. We thank you for this time, this subject. We thank you for our dear brother, Maurice Smith, as he comes to, basically, he is loving and serving his neighbors by using his gift and his calling to teach us and inform us and encourage us to think on these matters. And so, Lord, we pray you give him much grace as he lays out this information. Help us to be receptive and help us to think spiritually and biblically on these matters, God. For all these things concern our life, that they should bring, hopefully, you the glory and you the honor. So bless our time this morning, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen, amen. So I want to spend just a few moments to kind of talk. Last time, when we had part 1, we shared 4 biblical principles of leaving an inheritance. So 4 biblical principles for leaving an inheritance. So I want to kind of recap those principles as well as dig into one a little more for this session today. So last time, principle number 1 was God owns everything. That God owns everything. So The foundation on which a Christian does estate planning is built upon the recognition that God is the owner of everything, right? If God is the owner of all, we are merely stewards. We're just stewards, and we have a responsibility to find his plan, understand what his will and his principles are in terms of distribution of the property after we're gone that he has entrusted to us. Principle number 2, care for those dependent upon us. Care for those dependent upon us. And we have a responsibility to those who are financially dependent upon us. A lot of times when we're going on, and hopefully we're going on to be with the Lord, those are left behind. If we're not thinking of those matters, they're now left with that burden. As Sister Tracy shared an example, now the family is, we see all these things of GoFundMe stuff on trying to bury their loved ones in such a position. And we must consider, how can we provide for those who are left behind? Especially, I want us to really think about in our community, especially those who have been dependent on us, such as a surviving spouse, a minor children, and those with disabilities, So if we think about those who are surviving spouses who are really going to be dependent upon us, minor children, if they're still minors when we pass away, or those with disabilities who are definitely going to be needing that financial support and help. Principle number 3 is love, basically love. Love must be the basis of all of our giving. And so all of us as people should love and desire to leave a good heritage for our children and provide for their descendants material and moral needs too. So not just material needs, but also we think about how do we, as we love our family, we leave them material goods, but also how do we help them for their moral needs as well. And principle number 4, people over dollars. People over dollars, right? People are more important than dollars. And many people, unfortunately, when it comes to this topic, can be more concerned about avoiding probate or taxes than they are about the effect of dollars upon beneficiaries, right? So it's this last principle that I want to dig into a little bit more this morning. People over dollars, right? So we think, if you remember the parable of the prodigal son, it illustrates how the distribution of wealth can change a lifestyle. When the prodigal son got his inheritance early, he went to a far country, squandered it with wild living. So we must consider, when are our children and our beneficiaries ready and able to handle an inheritance, right? Can they handle it at age 18, 25, 30? Some of y'all like, yeah, make it 35, 40, right? So the question becomes, it has to really start with training up our children and our other family members on how to be good stewards. We really need to think, before we leave here, are we training our children and even other family members how to be good stewards? Help them to understand that money is a tool that should not be used solely for selfish reasons, but also to bless and serve others. So you may be familiar with this from Luke 16. Luke 16, verses 10 through 13. It says, one who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. And one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you to true riches? And if you've not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. So Jesus says that one is to use wealth, not store it up for selfish reasons or to be a servant of it, right? Wealth should be our servant, not vice versa. Wealth should be our servant, not vice versa, right? The disciples' wise use of wealth would help lead others to believe the message of the kingdom and help bring them to even accept the message of the kingdom. If one is faithful in their use of money, then they can be trusted with greater things. When we're faithful in our use of money, we can be trusted with greater things. A person cannot serve God and money. Amen. Because as masters, the two are mutually exclusive. Because at some point, money will call you to go this way, and God will call you to go this way. And you're going to have to make a decision. Are you going to follow money and love money? Because the love of money will drive one away from God. 1 Timothy 6:10 says, for the love of money, not money, the love of money, let's not get that twisted. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. So my point is, when we talk about people over money, we don't want the inheritance that we leave our children to drive them away from God. We don't want the inheritance that we leave our children to drive them away from God. But loving God will cause one to not make money as their primary concern in life. So we want to teach our children. So first thing, we must pass on our faith to our children and our family. We talk about living a legacy. And I like that term because at first I thought it was, we would say leaving a legacy. But I like living it because I need to live out my faith so that I can leave my faith. So I got to live out this thing before. So we must teach our children and our families, as best we can, about Jesus Christ and the gospel. We must tell them how Jesus died for their sins and he rose from the dead and pray that they would place their faith in Jesus Christ. And then, once we teach them faith in Jesus, we must teach them proper stewardship of money so that God is their master, not money. So we got to teach them the proper usage of money. So one of the best ways to teach your children good stewardship is to model it yourself.
Amen.
You can send them to all kind of classes. Go take this financial class. But most of us, if we're parents, most of what your children are going to learn is caught, not taught. Is caught, not taught. They're going to see and model and learn a lot of things from what they see us doing. And so we model good stewardship by staying out of excessive debt, saving up for the things we want, saving up. Delayed gratification is a sign of maturity. When you can, instead of you going out, as soon as you get some money in your hands, it's burning it up, and you got to run out to the store, and your kids you're trailing around. Okay, so they learn, as soon as I get some money, let's go spend it. Or, I want this, so let me put it on 2 credit cards and get in debt. So if we can teach them, I have patience, save up, so that they can learn it themselves. Save up, right? And then we also model it by being generous. May we be generous type of people when our children can see us giving to the church for the Lord's work, giving to those in need. See us not just hoarding, saving, yes, but also being generous and showing us having a generous heart. And so if we can do that, and so if we've done our work, then our family lineage is the right place to direct the resources that God has entrusted us to build. See, it is a good legacy to teach our children to serve God and others through a literal estate plan. They can serve God and others through the things and inheritance that we leave them if we have trained them properly. Now, if you don't have a family, some of you may go, well, I don't have any kids or anything, but if you don't have family, or you might be like, look, I ain't leaving my family. They're not going to be good stewards. You should pray and determine where it should go. Who or what organization shares your values? Is it a strong, local, gospel-centered church? Can be a good legacy. A reputable organization that serves the poor or the community is a good legacy, right? Maybe even some close friends that you know that shares your values, your Christian faith, and they would use that in ministry and the service to God. So ultimately, as I sit down, estate planning is less about how much wealth you have, but instead about why you have it and what are you going to do with it. So I leave you with this quote from Chuck Swindoll. Legacy isn't about us. It's about God working through us for his glory, not ours. May God bless you.
Amen. Thank you, sir. Well, good morning. I am Maurice Smith. I am so excited to be here with you this morning. I'm about to jump out of my skin. Yeah. And so Pastor really set the tone for the kind of conversation we should have here today. I just love the way he approaches this. And so, okay, I should stay in the screen.
Not you. We
all right.
Different heights.
All right. Okay. So I'll try not to bounce around. I'm excited about this. So he really laid out the foundation for how we should have this conversation. So I'm delighted to be here with you, and I have several slides to go through. We'll talk quickly through some of them, but if you have a question or something, throw a shoe at me, get my attention. We'll have a conversation about it. But I am looking forward to this dialogue today. And so let them work on some of the technology side of it. There's 3 objectives that I'd like to try to accomplish today. First, I want to remind you of what's in a basic estate plan. So we talked about that a little bit last time, but we'll touch on that some. I want to talk to you about defining your legacy and also calculating the value of your legacy. So we're going to talk a little bit about an approach on how you might look at that. And also about building a legacy planning team. Because legacy planning sometimes involves other professionals and other individuals to help you come up with the right team for yourself. So we want to talk about what that looks like. So I want to remind you of my approach to the practice of law. I spent most of my career working in financial services, and we built a law practice mostly for corporations, for businesses, for organizations, nonprofits, and for churches. But in many instances, a lot of my clients would ask me, can you help me with my own personal estate planning? And to us, it seemed consistent with what we were doing, because building a business plan for a corporation to be successful in the community is sort of like building a business plan for your estate and making you successful in your objectives and what you want to accomplish. So a few things about the way we approach the practice of law. The North Carolina State Bar frowns upon lawyers being ambulance chasers. So that means that if we recognize that someone has a need, that we're going to impose ourselves upon you to serve that need. So you will not get a hard sell from me today. In fact, I'm a terrible salesperson. You won't get any kind of sales pitch from me today. I am not going to call you later. The church and Tracy and Pastor probably have your names and addresses and information of who attended this workshop. I'm not going to ask for that. They probably wouldn't give it to me anyway. I'm not going to call you. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not interested in your welfare and what you want to do. It just means that you have to reach out to me if there's some services I can provide for you. If there's anything we say here today that is of interest to you, you decide, I want to go forward with a legacy plan and building a estate plan for my family, and you already have a lawyer that's engaged for some other services, somebody in your family, call that person. If something we say here today that's interesting to you and you want to move forward on some plan, and a family friend or relative or neighbor recommends a lawyer to you that you feel trusted with that advice, call that person. If it turns out that I've said something and I can be of assistance to you, then I welcome your call. But I'm not going to be bugging you for that. My admission to you today is that I don't have the answers to all questions. So if you ask a question for which I don't have the answer, I'm going to tell you I don't have the answer. But if you give me your information, I'll make sure I get that answer to you. But we're going to have some fun here today. So it's important as we talk about legal matters that I issue a disclaimer to you about the practice of law. And so so you see on the screen here, we'll see coming up next, a disclaimer that we offer to you in the practice of law here. The North Carolina State Bar has what is called the Rules of Professional Responsibility. A lawyer in the state can only give advice to his or her client. And a client is an individual who's made an affirmative decision that I want that lawyer to represent me, and the lawyer has agreed I will represent you. We are allowed to give legal education. So that is the context of this conversation today, is providing education to you. So if there's anything that you should ask of me in terms of what we're doing here, then I will frame that in the phrase of education to make sure that I'm providing you the information to help you be the best consumer, if you will, of legal or estate services. So let's review the lesson from part one. Some of you were here for part one, so this is going to feel like a review for you. So I will go through these slides relatively quickly because you've already seen them. Those of you who are new and who are online perhaps, who have not heard me talk about this and you were not part of part one, this is going to feel like a little bit of a sneak preview of what we talked about in part one. So if you have questions of me, then I'm happy to pause and answer those questions for you. So it's important to think about estate planning is really the puzzle piece of a much larger puzzle. So often I talk to clients and they think about estate planning and they think about it as a silo that's separated from all the other financial, social, health, concerns that you might have in your life. It's really just a part of the puzzle. There's so many other things that we should be thinking about. But estate planning affects nearly every other aspect of your life. So if you're thinking about building wealth or building a legacy, you think of big things for the next generation, there's so many other areas from your employment life, from your home life, from family life that all comes part of the equation. This is just a part of it that helps you connect the dots. So what do you say? We talk a little bit about you all here are the exception. I want you to know that. Most people in the United States do not have this kind of conversation. Did I say most people in the world don't have this kind of conversation? And so some of us think about legacy building for ourselves, and we think about it in broad, abstract terms, but we don't achieve the kind of legacy plans that we would like to have for ourselves for various reasons, some of which we just refuse or fail to actually construct a plan. We fail to actually put together a consideration for minor children. Pastor mentioned in principle 2 that you might have minor children or you have individuals who have special needs, and how are you going to provide for them in the event that you are incapacitated or you're not here, or you're unable to take care of that person? How are they to subsist going forward? Sometimes those questions are not answered. And sometimes we realize that, well, there's some things that we should work on that we haven't accomplished. So as we think about all the various life experiences that affect the concerns that we have with estate planning, what you might construct today is not one and done. It's going to change. Life changes, the community changes, the environment, the economy changes, and as it does, your plans will also change. So let's talk about next. I think the next slide coming up is a last will and testament. I'm going to run through the 4 documents that make up the basic estate plan for yourself. And the first one is a last will and testament. This is basically your final wishes. Once you are going to be with the Lord, what would you have happen to your legacy or the estate that you have left behind? In North Carolina, there are 4 requirements for a valid will. One, you have to be over 18 years old. You have to be of sound mind. So if you're signing this document, you need to know what you're signing. You have to have 2 disinterested witnesses, individuals who don't take from the will. They're not people who are going to inherit from you. It could be neighbors, family members, church members, but somebody who's not already included in the will, and your will has to be notarized. The things not included in your will are assets that you have that already have a beneficiary assigned to it, a bank account, insurance policy, something along that line. So you should have a last will and testament, because this sort of anchors your estate plan for everything else that has to go forward. The next item that you should have in your estate plan is a living will. And in North Carolina, it's called a declaration of a desire for a natural death. This living will is used when someone has been determined by a physician, a medical attendant, that you are not going to survive this illness that you're in. So you're in a vegetative state, you're in a coma. The doctors say the only thing that's keeping you alive are these machines. So then what would be the wishes of the person who now can't speak for themselves? What would it? So you'd make those wishes up front. One of the requirements is that you be of sound mind. I have had clients come to me and say, I'd like to get a will for my parent or a loved one, and they're already in a coma, so let's go ahead and write the will now. So I said, do they know what they're signing? In fact, no, I'll take their hand, put the pen in it, and I'll go ahead and write on the document for them. No. They're not of sound mind. They don't know what they're signing. If you're manually moving their hands on the paper, they're not signing themselves. That would not be a valid document in North Carolina. So you get to decide with the doctors, how should my treatment go forward if I'm unable to make those decisions for myself? The next document is a healthcare power of attorney. And a healthcare power of attorney is when the doctor says you're going to survive, but you may be in a position today that you're unconscious, you're unable to make your decision for yourself. Who do you want to make these decisions for you? So a healthcare agent is the person who makes the decisions to the doctors on what kind of treatment you want. Sometimes the doctor, someone is incapacitated and a leg or arm or something has to be amputated, has to have consent for surgery. That healthcare agent is the one who's there to make that decision as if they were you. It's important to choose somebody as a healthcare agent and someone you trust and someone who knows your preferences, your religious beliefs. Probably not a good idea to use a paper boy or the mailman or somebody like that who doesn't know you very well. Choose somebody who knows you and can help make that right kind of decision with your doctor. The last document we have in your basic estate planning is a power of attorney. And so the healthcare power of attorney deals with healthcare and medical care needs and issues. But the general power of attorney has to do with financial concerns. You're incapacitated or you are unavailable and not able to make decisions for yourself. So you have a power of attorney, a general power of attorney, an agent who can make financial decisions. So while you're in the hospital or incapacitated, this person can make decisions by making sure your bills are paid, the monies are transferred, that if whatever business has to be taken care of for you, they can make those decisions for you. So you choose someone who has your best interest in mind, because that's one of the requirements for being a power of attorney agent, but also one who's competent enough to be able to handle these concerns for you. So these are the 4 documents that we talked about before that make up the basic estate plan. If I ran through those too quickly for someone, you want to catch me afterwards or send me an email or a text or something, happy to go in more details about what those documents look like. Again, if you know a lawyer, someone who can help you with this documentation, by all means, feel welcome to pick up that conversation with that individual. Now we arrive at with the main topic of what we're going to talk about here today, and that's living a legacy. You have your basic estate plan is put aside, and now you're feeling pretty good about what I have here, but now I want to think more proactively about my legacy. What is this legacy and how do I want to proceed going forward? So what we're going to talk about here is what is a legacy. So let's have some dialogue about that, how to achieve your legacy, and steps towards a legacy plan. Because I'm a firm believer that if you're going to have an intentional legacy vision for yourself, there has to be followed up with a plan on how you're going to achieve that legacy. So this right here talks about some of the common mistakes that some people make about when they're setting up their legacy. I mentioned some of these earlier. So there's mistakes when we're setting up a legacy plan, or basic estate plan, but there's also mistakes that we make when setting up a legacy plan for ourselves. We just refuse to go through all the details that have to be done. We're unaware of some of the terms that have to be used. And we think about what could go wrong. Lots of things can go wrong. I talk to clients who don't have a estate plan for themselves, much less a legacy plan. And they have lots of good reasons why they don't do it. Here's some of the reasons, but also here's some of the things that could actually go wrong by this happening. And I said, do you have minor children? Yes. Do you have assets that's going to come from a retirement plan, a 401k or something? Yes. Do you own a home? Yes. Do you have vision and wishes for your family going forward that you would like to see them provided for? Yes. Do you have any plans? No. But there's a disconnect between what we want, the intent that we have for a family, and the provisions that we've put in place to protect them and take care of them and the other needs and wishes that we have for ourselves. I mentioned earlier to you, you are the exception. Most people are not sitting in a room like this or have not sat in a room like this and had this kind of conversation. So I applaud you all for being here, and I applaud you for your interest in this, because I think this could make a huge difference in how you want to establish your legacy going forward. So let's talk about what legacy means to you. So as much as I can provide all kinds of definitions for you for what is a legacy, it really is a personal decision. If we went around the room here and asked everybody, what's the idea of legacy for you, we're going to probably have as many ideas as there are individuals in this room. So don't look for me or any other professional to come before you and say, this is what your legacy should be. That is your choice to make. Our choice as a professional who might be part of your team to help you get there is to figure out what is the best mechanism, the best tools to accomplish the vision that you have for yourself. So I like to believe that most of us want to know that our lives stood for something, that people would remember us. And for a moment, that people would grieve us if we're gone. But how does that fit into your legacy? I heard a speaker mention once that we are 2 generations away from obscurity. And I said, so what do you mean by that? And she says, what do you know about your parents? I know a lot about them. I know this, and this. She said, okay. What do you know about your grandparents? Well, I know this, and I know this, and this. She said, okay. What do you know about your great-grandparents? I know their name. Okay, so your great-grandchildren would know your name, and that's about it. Is that the legacy that you want to have for your life, for yourself? You know, I'd like to have a little bit more than that. So if you think about, well, then if we want to be intentional about our legacy living on and going forward and continuing to do good things, then how are we going to create that? So I want to introduce you to somebody that I recently learned about, not too long, in fact, just earlier this year. His name is William Hewitt, and he is my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. A family friend is into genealogy, but the method that he uses is he uses Census Bureau reports rather than DNA reports. And he digs through the courtrooms and find all these census reports to sort of figure out who was born when and where and to whom, when and where, and he goes back and he traces it. And so my great times 6 grandfather was born in 1775, before this was even a country. And he lived in this area called Lockwood Folly District of Brunswick County. I'm originally from Southport, down in Brunswick County, so in the home area where I was born. He married Nancy in 1780 and had 14 children. So he was born just about a century before the emancipation of slaves from bondage in this country. So I wonder, what would great-granddaddy times 6 Hewitt would think of me today? What was his life like? What would it, what was his days like? What kind of, the Census Bureau has indicated that he was property. So you know what that means. So what did he think about the idea of legacy, or was that even a completely foreign concept to him? And what would he believe that he would marvel at the fact that we were sitting in a room like this, thinking about legacy and our future, and have the freedoms and the resources and the education that we have today. He would find this marveling, I imagine. So I think about where I am today, and let's imagine maybe 6 or 7 generations from now, would anybody know who I am? And is there anything that I can do today to make their lives a little bit easier, or the causes I think a little easier? We have the opportunity today among ourselves to be intentional about our legacy, but also doing something about the legacy. So let's talk about this legacy and defining what it means to you. So if you look at the dictionary, or you talk to financial professionals, they'll define legacy as things like property and assets and homes and money and stuff like that. But you heard Pastor earlier, maybe that's an instrumentality of achieving your legacy, but that in and of itself isn't necessarily your legacy. So legacy is what's important to you. That's a question and an answer that each and every one of us have to give. So the other day was watching on the news about, my wife and I, we watched the evening news, and there was a story about the fires out west, forest fires. And this family was given 5 minutes to flee their home. That's how fast the flames were coming. And the official said, grab what you can, get in your car and leave. So we asked the question among ourselves. So if someone knocked on our door, say, Maurice and Diane, something's happened. There's a gas leak. There's a fire occurring. There's some tragedy occurring. You have 5 minutes to get out of your home. What would you grab? And my wife says, I'll grab my wedding album. I'll grab the baby's book. I'll grab my parents' picture. I said, that's important, but if I'm not here, make sure you grab my computer off my desk. So I think I backed up my files, but there's important stuff on that computer. She said, I'm not grabbing your computer. I said, we know what the babies look like, but they look, grab my computer. We still have some work to do on that. So she hasn't agreed that she's going to do that. But what you grab, think about it for a moment. You're given 5 minutes to grab what you can at your home and run. The things you grab must be really important to you. And maybe not so much the actual item that you grab, but what it represents. She said family is important to her. I'm grabbing the photo albums, the baby book, mementos, the things that cannot be replaced. That's what she's grabbing. She says, it's your fault if you don't back up your computer to the cloud. Okay. So she's grabbing what's really important to you. So if you think about what you might grab, that actually might signal what's important to you. So then I thought, for the reflection, I would grab the family Bible. I would grab the last birthday card that my late grandmother gave me with the $2 that's still in it. I would grab the things, the heirlooms, the things, my father's cufflinks, the kind of things that are irreplaceable. And all relate to family relationships. Those are the things that I would grab. Because if everything else burned down, we can file an insurance claim for, but some things are just irreplaceable. And those things that are irreplaceable to you signal to us what it should be a part of your legacy. So let's take a look here. Now we're going to start getting into the nuts and bolts of how we define a legacy, what's important to you, and also how we're going to add some value, some monetary value to it, because that's going to be an important part of the plan. So how we get to forming a legacy is understanding what reflects our values. So in that 5 minutes you have to grab things, I imagine that's going to determine what your values are. Then we're going to apply some order to your values, create some priorities, and that's going to be the beginning steps of an estate plan. So let's take a look here and let's sort of work our way through this. Now I'm going to suggest to you, this is a suggested approach from our firm. You can choose the method that works best for you to set up the order of the priorities of things that should be in your legacy plan. But this is just a suggested approach that you might consider. So first, for the legacy plan, is think about what are the things that are absolutely must be in the plan. What is the most important things to you? So if you're given 5 minutes and you're grabbing the baby book and the wedding albums and heirlooms and father cufflinks and things like that, those sort of represent the family and history. Those are important things to you. So if that's the case, then family welfare might be the top item on your list. So if you're building your plan, you're going to say, I need to make sure that the welfare of my family is provided for in this estate plan. And so you get to define that. What does welfare mean? Well, I want to make sure that if I'm leaving a spouse behind and that they are able to take care of themselves, they're not going to go hungry. They're going to be provided for. I want to make sure that my family is left with no debt. So I want to make sure that debt doesn't get in the way of them living the standard of living that they're accustomed to. I want to make sure that if I have dependents, that they are provided for, that college may be already put aside for them. So if they want to go to college, lacking the funds to do so will not be an issue. I want to make sure that whatever it needs to prepare for my family for the future, those fundings and those mechanisms going to already be in place. So that might be the foundation of your plan. That's the number one thing you say, I'm going to work on. Then you say, okay, I've got that. That's taken care of. What else is important, a little less important, but what else is important? So we move to the next level of your plan, and you think about, well, what one-time gifts do I want to give to anybody, whether it's family members, friends, to my church, to organizations? In a will, they're called bequests. These are gifts that you provide for in your will, or they could be the beneficiaries on an insurance policy. So what special bequest now should you consider? And these gifts may be something that has a symbolic meaning. It could be something of financial value, but it could be something that has symbolic meaning to it. For instance, in my family, I have possession of something that belonged to my father, which is an old, raggedy, tattered time book, is what it says. My great-grandfather was an entrepreneur, and he paid individuals to work in agriculture back in our hometown. He owned a farm. You could work all day long and get 15 cents for the day. You can't hire anybody for that today. But there's all these meticulous records in 1897 and 1901 of who worked that day, what they produced, and what he paid them. And I have that book. It's important in our family that time book stays in the bloodlines of the Smiths. And so I want to make sure that if anything happens to me, that my sisters or someone who's in our bloodline is able to take that and continue it on. It's a symbolic meaning for our family, that whoever holds that will pass it on to the next line of Smiths. So our son knows where it is, and so he knows that it's on the wall, it's framed inside the shadow box. Son, grab that, always protect that, and keep that with you. So if you might think about, so what gifts do I want to make to anybody that are beyond the basic welfare for my family that should be somehow recorded and provided for either in your will or some kind of testamentary writing that says, if I'm not here, these are things that are important to me to maintain and continue the legacy for me and or the legacy for my family. Then once we've created that one-time gift, we start thinking a little bit more aspirational now. So our family's taken care of. They're going to be just fine, financially that is. Special gifts have been awarded to individuals that I would like to have recognized. But now I begin to think a little more aspirational about what do I want the future to look like in terms of my legacy, to be represented. And so here we start thinking a little more philanthropically about, I have worked with families who have set up private foundations. Say, and I will fund the foundation with an insurance policy proceeds, because I want to ensure that, that certain things happen going forward. And so if you decide, I want my legacy to have some structure to it, if we're going to create a corporation that's going to enforce certain things going forward, that's going to live from generation to generation after that, then that requires a little more thought and requires a little more planning. Think about the Kennedys, the Rockefellers, those families who have wealth and who have made major contributions to society. They had to start at some point with one person who says, we're going to start this legacy for this family going forward. So I think, why not us? Start with us to create a legacy for our families going forward, that in decades to come, that's going to be meaningful to our family, to our communities, and perhaps to the nation. There's lots of things to consider when you get into a foundation, the 501c3 designation, the governance of it, who gets to control it, how you're going to fund it, tax implications. But if you decide you want to go down that path, there are professionals to help us make those decisions. The final point I'll mention on this journey, if you will, in building this legacy plan is to think about maybe about charitable endowment. And the charitable endowment is essentially a self-funding fund that you put aside that's going to run in, that's be perpetually funded. So you decided, I want to create a scholarship in my family's name, and I want that scholarship to always live forever. And so at this point, it's just a matter of amassing enough of a principal value of an endowment that the interest alone will pay the scholarship. And if the interest isn't touched, in scholarship terms, it's called a corpus. But if that principal is never touched, then it will live on forever. So you want to establish a scholarship here at your church, a scholarship at your alma mater, or some other institution. That can be done in your family name, and if you believe that's important to you for your legacy. So now that you have this legacy intent, and you said, these are the 4 pillars that sort of make up the legacy that I would like. And this is simply just a suggestion for you. These are the 4 pillars. Yours might have 2 pillars, they might have 10 pillars to it. But these are the things that I'd like to accomplish. Now, let's get down to business. How are we actually going to accomplish this? Because one of the most important things we have to think about is we have this complete picture of all the things we want to do. We've laid out the priority of what's important to us the most and what may be a little less important to us, but now we have some priorities to them. Now we need to figure out, what is this going to cost me? Because most of these points, unless it's something symbolic in a bequest or a gift that you give to a family member, all of these other items have a dollar value attached to them. So now you work with professionals to figure out how much would it cost to ensure that my family is going to be protected and taken care of? How much would it cost for me to give one-time gifts to whomever that I would like to provide those gifts to? If I want to set up a private foundation and I talk to a financial planner, how much do I need to set aside or have in an insurance policy that's going to be able to ensure that that foundation succeeds? If it's going to be an endowment or an endowment at your church that's going to provide a scholarship or some funding in the community in perpetuity, what kind of money should I put in the principal amount that's going to ensure that that activity will always occur in the future? And once you add up all the individual prices to these items, then you come over total dollar value for the legacy intent you have for your family. Does that make sense? This is the total dollar for me to accomplish all the things that I want my legacy to represent. It comes up with a total dollar amount. Now, for most of us,
that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. For most of us, because up until this point, we've been dreaming about what we want our legacy to be, impact we want to have on the community, what we want our family to feel, the benefits we want to have going forward. And then by the time you figure out what is the dollar value to figure this out, then sometimes there is the dollar value, what it takes to create this, and then there's the gap between what we have today and what we might have in death benefits and the existing insurance policy. And so when I work with businesses and corporations, nonprofits, they have ambitions of what they want to accomplish for their organization. But they say, but I'm right here. I want to be Amazon, but I'm actually a storefront down on the corner. I want to be Facebook. I got 2 friends who like me on my page. so there's a gap between where you want to be and where you are today. And so what we say is, now that we know where you want to be, and now that we know where you are, we just have to manage that gap. You could lower your ambitions. But you said, no, I really want these to be my legacy, intent for my family. Then we just have to manage that gap. How exactly do we manage the gap? Well, there's several ways that we do that. One, you said, well, I could manage the gap by contacting my insurance agent saying, I need a $2 million life insurance policy. Depending on your age, depending on your health, depending on what that's going to cost you. Okay, that's kind of expensive. Maybe I should lower my ambition a little bit. Or you say, wait a minute, if if I add up the equity in my home and I think about what I have in my 401k for my retirement plan, and I think about what I have in savings, and I think about other things I have, maybe that gap is not quite as far, as wide. So we think about what tools can you use to be able to fill that gap and make it up. So then we get us to the point of having a legacy team. This gets to be a little bit complicated math, because now you're trying to figure out the present value of money, the discount rate, how much money you put aside today that's going to add up to a certain amount 20 years from now. What mechanism should I use? What investment should I invest in? Those are all the kind of complicated questions that you might have to answer for yourself. We always recommend making sure you build a legacy team for yourself. And your legacy team might include your attorney, someone who's going to make sure the documentation expresses your wishes. If you have an insurance agent, a life insurance agent, a property insurance agent who can help you mitigate risk and also help you with a plan that's going to allow you to save up the kind of money you need to match your legacy, have a conversation with that person. Talk to your financial institution, your bank or your credit union. What tools, what products, what investment instruments do you have that's going to help me close this gap? If you have a financial planner, I definitely recommend talking to that financial planner and having a conversation. Okay, here's what I want to do. Here's where I am. I have a gap. What plan can we draw up today that's going to help me close that gap to create the kind of legacy I want? Accountant, tax advisors, have a conversation with your pastor about the kind of things that might be that's important to you, that if you want to have it cemented here at the church, Pastor, how can we work together to build a plan that's going to leave the kind of legacy at the church that's going to be consistent with both our values? And by all means, have a conversation with your family if you deem it necessary to make sure they understand what your intent are. Because in many cases for a legacy plan, it's your family who's left behind who's going to have to make sure these things get taken care of. And sometimes families are surprised to say, she wanted what? She put this aside? You know, having somebody needs to know what your intent are and why you want to create that. So we have been talking about legacy from gifts, from bequests, from financial terms, from family welfare to being aspirational. But I don't want to leave this conversation with you thinking that is the only thing that you should be concerned about legacy. Legacy, the financial instruments that we use to accomplish legacy are important. Those are part of the planning. That's part of the instrumentality of getting to where you want to be. But if you're one of those folks who grab the baby's book when you're given 5 minutes to run out of the home, then family is important to you. So children, we argue, is a legacy. You know, your children, your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, they are a legacy to you. So how do you protect them? In many instances, I know we do at our church, that we will, when someone has a new child and some months after that, they will come to the church and they'll be dedicated, and the pastor will ask, who is the godparent? And someone would stand up, or a couple would stand up and say, we are the godparents, and they're part of a very lovely ceremony. But if something were to happen to you and to both parents, and you're going to the clerk of Superior Court here in Wake County, and that clerk is going to appoint a guardian of the person who's going to take care of the child, and a guardian of the property of that child. And that provision is not laid out in your will. Someone showed up and said, well, I'm the godparent, we have the child. That's not persuasive to the clerk. And you're like, we don't know who you are. We have no writing here to suggest that the parents intended for you. And you probably would not want your child in most instances to end up in foster care, or to end up with some individuals whose values are not consistent with the way that you would want your child raised. So if you think about your children as a legacy, this is the time to think about how do we plan to ensure that they're going to get the emotional, financial, and caring support that you would provide for them as a parent. And so we always think about in basic, estate planning to make sure that's covered, but also in legacy planning to make sure the resources are there. So in some cases, you may choose someone to be a godparent, and you might actually put in the will that they're the guardians of our choice, which is actually very persuasive to a clerk because they're most likely lean to your wishes that are in the will. But they seem like they're good people today, but they changed on you later. Or they don't have the financial means really to take care of your child in the manner that you wanted them to. And so you want to make sure there's financial resources to ensure that. And just as we mentioned earlier, if you're doing an estate plan, it's typically not a one and done. You seem like a good guardian today. A couple of years from now, you're not a good guardian now at all. Things have happened in your life. You're like, we don't want you raising our children. We've seen what you've done with your own. Well, we've seen how you're acting in the community. You have changed on us. Give me that will. Let's rewrite it. We can put somebody else in it. So in those instances like that, you want to be very intentional about protecting your number one legacy, your children, and making sure that the tools are there to make that you've chosen someone to be a guardian that's going to match up with some of the factors we've mentioned here about their stability and their age, their livelihood, their values, the kind of things that's going to raise your child in the environment for which you would like to have them raised. Then we talk about your life as a legacy. This is very little has to do with your financial side of things, but think about your life. Do you want your great-grandchildren, what do you want them to know about you? How you lived? What were your values? The things that are important to you? You know, I grew up on a farm. I have 3 younger sisters. I spent a lot of time in the fields with my dad. And my sister said, listen, Dad taught you things he didn't teach us. You were out in the field with him. You were going to the farmer's market with him. You had more time with him. My dad was a teacher. It's always about everything you did, put a seed in the ground. There was a parable for that. Everything he was always teaching me about. She said, we don't know those lessons. I said, you know everything that taught me. She said, tell me a story. Okay. So I told her a story. She said, never heard that. Tell me another story. All right. So I told her the second story. Never heard that. You better write this down for us. So we ended up penning a book for my family so they could see the stories, just 10 of the lessons my dad taught me. And we gave it out to all the nieces and nephews and grandkids. Said, you need to know this about your grandfather, about your uncle, because these are the things he thought were important to pass down for generations. So think about the things that you've learned. My dad told me a long time ago, he said, son, I've fallen in a few potholes in life. My job as a father is to show you where the potholes are so you don't fall in the same one. Now, if you fall in the ones I thought fell in, that's on you. I showed you where they were. You fall in some new ones, then make a note of it so you can warn somebody behind you. There's a pothole right there. So the lessons that we have learned in our lives, we should pass those on to others. How do you memorialize that? How do you share that? How do you explain that to your family? That's part of a legacy that should be expressed, should be shared, and should be provided going forward. Final point I'll make for you on legacy planning here is there are other legacy topics we're just touching the surface we didn't get to. Elder abuse. You know, because as much as you can plan for your legacy, there's friction and things that can come along that can actually get in the way of you accomplishing your legacy. Elder abuse is one of it. In the financial services world, we see it a lot. And often the people who are robbing an elderly person is a fellow family member who's stealing from them. And we try to help them put tools in place to protect them. Inheritance advances. Sometimes we recognize that some people, when they before they pass away, decide, I want to give you your inheritance now, and they will hand it to them. Hopefully they don't act like the prodigal child, Pastor. They want to give you the inheritance ahead of time. In the law, that's called an advance. It isn't in the will. We provide this to you in advance of my passing. Revocable trust. A revocable trust is you want to protect your assets and you want to have some taxable benefit for it. So you take all your assets of someone and you put it into a trust. That's what we did for my mom. We put all her property into a revocable trust. I am the trustee for it, and I am managing her affairs for her to make it easier for her. A spendthrift trust. You put you have a child that's inheriting property from you, maybe substantial property, and you're pretty sure they're going to blow it before the year's over with. You say, I need to protect them from themselves. And so we as state lawyers, I didn't put it into a trust so they can't get their hands on everything at once, and it would be meted out to them at a stage and a schedule that you would provide for them. Life estates, restricted gifts, there's a number of tools that are available for you. It can get complicated. but it starts with your legacy intent. What do I want my legacy to mean? What do I want people to remember about me? What good do I want to have in society, in my church, at my family, in my community? Start with that vision first. All the other things, the tools that it takes to put it in place, that's actually the easy stuff. Your vision is the hard part. I'm going to summarize for you as we're wrapping up 5 steps as to creating your legacy path. First thing here is you want to have an estate plan. Start with your will, your living will, your 2 power of attorneys. Get that basic documentation in place, because that sort of lays the foundation for the future as how to protect your estate. The second thing you want to think about is creating that legacy. What do I want my legacy to mean? And now you're thinking more prospectively from a vision standpoint. What do I want my legacy to mean? So when my great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren are here, what benefit am I to their lives by the decisions that I can make today? The third thing is, how are we going to fund this legacy? You know, I have these ambitions, I have these resources. How do I close this gap? We have to, first of all, do the calculation so we know that, number one, there is a gap. Then how much of a gap is there? And then let's make a plan. And that is adding people to your team. I want to invite my lawyer. I want to bring in my insurance agent. I want to bring in my banker. I want to bring in all the people who are going to work together to help me build a legacy plan for my family. And finally, we're going to have achieved this plan. And then I will make sure that the people who need to know to execute on this will be aware. If you're going to set up a legacy plan and it includes an endowment or a gift to the church, let the pastor know ahead of time so that he isn't surprised during a grieving moment. Okay, how do we manage this? Those contracts and those provisions are usually put in place early enough so that the institution knows to expect it, the family knows to expect it, and it's a smooth transition when the time comes. Final slide I have for you. Next to the final slide is just a reminder that on our website we have a publication. If you don't have, my web designer said, no, when you put publication on your website, you make people give you your name and their address. That way you can follow up, you can try to sell them things. Now, if you just go out there and just hit download, you can get it. I don't even know you've gotten it. So it's free to get. If you have other people in your family that are interested in something like this, even if you have a lawyer, then by all means, feel welcome to download the document. It'll give you some input, some suggestions on the basic estate planning. And finally, I am available to answer any questions that anyone may have. I didn't time myself, so I probably ran a little bit long on this, but.
No, yeah, plenty of time.
Okay, got plenty of time? Yes, sir.
How much do something like that cost that? I have a lot of that to come see someone like you. How much would something like that would cost for someone to come come and establish that with what your office do?
Oh, very good. Thank you, sir. So the question is, how much would it cost for someone to use our legal services for estate planning? We charge $450 for a will, for the whole basic plan, and $600 for a couple. That can vary. So legal services are like any other kind of services that you might get. We recommend that you shop around. I tell you, I'm a terrible salesperson. We recommend you shop around. And so you might find a law firm that charges $1,500, $2,000. I think about the average in North Carolina is about $1,200, $1,500 for a will, and the ancillary documents that come along with that. We underprice that because we want to make this as available to the masses in our community as much as possible. And if you find one less expensive, then that's available to you. Well, I mentioned earlier, maybe I didn't mention it, you can actually write all these documents yourself. You don't need a lawyer. The challenge is that if you get anything wrong, it might get kicked out by the court at the time that you can't repair it because you're gone. So you can have them rewritten write them yourself if you wish to do so. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And all this, I'm sorry, where did I get? One more question. Okay, so you're correct, but do your office? I have one. I came out of my bank. I did one, but they actually didn't so much as help me get put things right. It's just hey, da. Do your office actually, do the stuff that we just talk about?
Yes. From the basic estate planning part, our office does help. It would be a disservice to you if I pushed a bunch of forms your way, say fill this out, and I come back for a document and say sign this, and now you have your will. I want to have a conversation with you to understand what do you want to accomplish, help you think about maybe some of the unintended consequences. You say, I like to do this. We'll say, well, have you thought about how that child's going to feel the way you've structured it this way? Have you thought about the tax implications of it? And so a will in North Carolina is fairly easy to write for a lawyer. But there are other documents sometimes that have to go along with that to actually give you exactly what it is you want to accomplish. So as we think about it from practicing business law and contracts and transactions, it's really important to know up front, what does the client want to accomplish? So if I'm helping somebody with a purchase and acquisition, they're buying a business or they're selling their business, it's really important to have that conversation up front to understand, what are you trying to do here and what's important to you? The same thing happened with estate planning. We apply business transaction principles to it. What do you want to accomplish? And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that document accomplishes that for you. Terrible salesperson. I'm not going to ever rush you into anything. You come to me and you say, okay, here's what I want to do. And months later, sometimes a client will reach back to me and say, I know I talked to you months ago. Listen, we go at your pace. You just don't die on me in the meantime now. All bets off at that point. But you take your time, you talk to your family, and you call me as often as you want to have a conversation. Because at the end of the day, if your needs aren't met, then I've failed as your lawyer. So great question, sir. My pleasure. Good morning.
Good morning. Is life insurance enough to define who your child will go to if something were to happen to the parents? Because we did name a beneficiary, not beneficiary, someone to take care of our child if something were to happen. But I know you mentioned that that's part of thinking about that too. So I'm thinking, is life insurance enough to do that, or does that need to be written in a will?
Very good question. The life insurance policy provides the financial means to take care of a minor child if something happens to you. It is not persuasive necessarily to the clerk of superior court. That should be in the will. So when the clerk says, I have a minor child that's inherited some property, if you're under 18 years old, it cannot go directly to the child. It has to go to a trust. And if there's not a trust already in your will, the clerk is going to basically take possession. The county is going to take possession of those money from the life insurance policy. And they will give it to the child at 18 years old. In the meantime, who's going to be the custodian or the guardian of the child, or the guardian of any other property that the child have? Those are designations we recommend that be in your last will and testament. Because if they're not, the clerk is going to make those decisions for you. And what she has is a list of lawyers, like court-appointed lawyers who act as guardians, and she's just going to go down that list and choose the next one. Now, if you think about who should be the guardian of your child, think about someone who can actually do the job. That's right. Because they're going to have custodian control and possession of your child's inheritance. And you can mandate that they be bonded. An insurance company will come along and bond them, which means that if they were to steal the money or embezzle the money, the insurance company will come along and make the child hold on it. But you're only going to get bonding for somebody who has a good credit report, who has the financial means, and not a convicted felon, someone like that, that the insurance company is not going to feel like it's trustworthy enough to manage that for them. So the long answer to your question, the beneficiary for the insurance policy just simply says, the insurance company is going to say, who's the beneficiary? They're going to write a check, and they're going to put it in the mail and send it to that person. And if it's someone that you might say, I'm going to choose a sibling to be the beneficiary, and your job is to hold it for my child until they're 18. You've got this handshake agreement that they're going to do that for you. So a trust anchors it and puts a lot of protection around your child to make sure that doesn't happen. Life happens. Sometimes, people who have very good intentions sometimes make honest mistakes and sometimes disingenuous mistakes. but you want to make sure that your child's inheritance is going to be secure for them.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah. What are some of the ways that you can leave property to children, grandchildren, and so forth? What are some of the legal ways to leave that without causing problems?
Yes, good question, sir. There's a number of ways. So there is a testamentary transfer of property. So let me explain that. Get out of the legal language. Sometimes you can transfer property before you die, or you can have it transferred after you die. So let's talk about before you would die. And so if you have property and you have children and you know they're going to be the heirs of your property, you can go ahead and make them joint own the property with you today. And so that if something happens to you, then as joint owners of the property, they have what is called a right of survivorship. And so your interest in the property will automatically go to the other owners of the property. There is a little bit of a caution in doing that, because if it turns out, let's just say, for instance, that my wife and I decide we're going to make our home joint with our 2 children. And so now there's 4 names on the property, on the deed. And our son decides, well, Dad, I'm going to declare bankruptcy. His quarter interest in the property goes into the bankruptcy court as to be settled. And a bankruptcy trustee might decide, well, you own 1/4 interest in that property. We need to get that value out to pay your creditors. So we're going to force a sale of the house so we can get your quarter interest out. So that occasionally happens. So you want to ensure that if you add other people's names to the property, they're financially secure enough, they're not going to jeopardize the entire property for everybody else. Before you die, you can actually take your money and put it into a revocable trust. That's what I did for my mom. And so I am the trustee for the property. So I'm managing her. She has substantial land, so I'm managing that for her. The beneficiaries of the trust are myself and my 3 sisters. And so if anything happens to Mom, but Dad passed away a few years ago, anything happened to Mom, then the trust will then go on outside of probate, outside the eyes and the actions of the court, will go ahead and distribute it to the 4 beneficiaries. So now after you die, we're talking about proposing something like putting their names in a will. And in the will, you indicate who the heirs are going to be and say, this is your bequest. You will get this property after I've passed away. And then the court's involved at that point. We're showing them the will. We say, here's the deed. And we do what is called a quick claim deed. It's, you just go ahead and write up a new deed where everybody's interest is named on that deed. Those are your basic ways of being able to transfer the property to them. If you decide that you want to, now I've seen this before, and on a couple of occasions it's been problematic, that where a parent says, in this case it was a father, this latest one, have multiple children, and they fight like cats and dogs. And he said they don't get along one another, so I'm going to leave all my property to one child, and your job is to make sure everybody else is treated fairly. It's how it's written in the will. But there's no precise language along that line. He showed me the will that he had written by someone. Well, the one child inherited the property and basically said, what siblings? I don't know any siblings. The other siblings were not happy. But if you inherit the sole property, it's yours. And you can then gift off pieces to your siblings, but you have to know who you're leaving it to, and they're trustworthy enough to honor the wishes that you have laid out for them. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So we do have a question from the chat. Are you able to speak to the cost of the genealogy search? And do you have a recommendation for someone to use?
No and no. So I joined Ancestry.com, and I learned 47% of my DNA comes from the country of Ghana, and I visited Ghana. It's a lovely time. I can't tell you, it was a spiritual visit to go to a place and walk the path that likely my ancestors walked, into bondage. But I don't know what they cost. And the only thing, I think I paid like $49.95 for the Ancestry DNA. and it gives you maybe a couple of generations, but then you have to pay a certain amount of money to go farther and deeper into the program. So to be honest with you, I'm not sure what the other costs are. Our family friend who did the search on our family using Census Bureau records, he didn't charge us anything for it. I don't think he does it for a business. That's the hard way of doing genealogy study, where you're going to the courthouse and you're just pulling up records and finding out when somebody died, looking on a death report, certificate, figure out when somebody was born, then going finding that report and just chasing it back the manual way. The ancestry DNA type software systems, they're supposed to do all that for you, so you don't have to go to all the various courthouse doing so. But I'm afraid I don't know what it would cost to do so.
I had just a kind of a comment to just reinforce something you were talking about, children, and leaving, picking godparents. So, one of my pastoral advices to kids when they, young parents, when they bring their children in for dedication is pick a godparent that you would want to leave your children to. Because sometimes, you just pick my best friend or just somebody I know. And I was like, well, that's all well and good. But I would actually, if you're going to pick someone that shares your values, that if something happened to you, and in fact, that was very true for my wife and I, is that our godparents of our children are in our will to take, they're old enough now, but if someone's happened, they were listed along with some other people additionally identified, because that's how we pick godparents, not just, this is you cool person. No, you're enough that we can entrust you with our minor children. And your point about reviewing it, I think we got to continue to look at because that happened to us where years passed by, we had some names on there, we go, you know what, something happened, they're no longer married, we're going to remove them from the list. And so we just got to keep a reminder. I guess your estate planner, I know ours reminds us every few years. You might want to do so. That's a good way, or you do it yourself. Put some type of note to remind yourself. Review these things, because you don't think about them sometimes until something happens, and then you don't want to be out of date against your wishes. So I just encourage everyone, especially if you got small kids or you're picking godparents, pick some that you would really, not just friends, but someone you actually couldn't. They're friends, but you wouldn't trust your kids with.
Absolutely. That is such good counsel, Pastor, because our lives change. And people who seem well-intended today might go through all kinds of trauma in the future. And you realize you're not the same as I knew you to be. And some people may be really good friends of ours, good family members, but they're lousy parents. And you think, or they live in a place where I wouldn't want my child to be raised. Right. So those are all factors to keep in mind.
Yes, Maurice, when you were talking about that, their values, and for me, it's important. Like, if you broke, like you in debt, you know your friends. Like, what are you going to do if I leave my child a substantial life insurance policy? Are you going to be able to? Are you going to use the money wisely for my children? And say, we friends, but I need to look out really for my child. And I like that was on your slide about that. You were saying that you got to think about the parenting skills, the family values, the location, the lifestyle, personality, the age and stage of life. And so grandma, you can't leave on the grandma, because grandma is old. Is she going to be able to do the things, you're thinking about all those things when you're really thinking about your children as a legacy and the financial stability that these people have. Because now they're going to be taken care of. If they're struggling now, and do you want your child in that situation where they're struggling? Is he going to be eating ramen noodles every day? So you got to think about those things as well.
Absolutely. So you're building a legacy plan. Make sure the people on your team are well-rounded. So it's good to have your lawyer, have your banker, have your insurance agent. If you have a financial planner, have that person. These people will help you with the science and the math and the financial instruments. Don't leave out your pastor. Don't leave out family members who are responsible. Don't leave your spouse out of the conversation if you believe that person is going to contribute to the welfare of the plan that you're creating. But make sure that these other sides of your legacy, it isn't just the money, it isn't just the investment, it isn't just property. Make sure that other aspects are covered as well. Remember, you're grabbing the baby book, but you get 5 minutes to run out of the house. That signaled what's important to you. It wasn't just all the financial stuff. You're not grabbing the debit card and the credit card. I'll replace that later. I'm grabbing the things that's irreplaceable.
I just wanted to add, when it comes to beneficiaries,
Yes, ma'am.
sometimes we can sign one when we're 20, you know, for the children or whoever.
Yes.
And then life just goes on and we just let it die. Okay, maybe that person has changed too.
Yes, that's right.
So we need to think about that and make sure, like as Pastor said, updated periodically. They could be dead, you know, and
Yes.
you didn't change it.
Yeah.
Address changes. They could be out of the country. And it's so hard to find everything. So it's those small things like that we do need to go back and review.
Thank you, Mayor. In fact, that echoes the recommendation we give to clients. At least once a year, maybe every 2 years, go in and take a look at your estate documentation. And think about that slide that lists all the different kind of things: marriage, birth, moving, new job, all the kind of things that occur. You want to make sure if any of these things have happened, then we want to go in and we want to make a change to our estate planning. I had a client a few years ago. She and her husband has separated. They gotten divorced, and he had left on his job retirement plan her as the beneficiary. The new wife didn't know this, and he had never changed. Just never got around to changing because he didn't like her anymore. So you would have thought he would have changed if he remembered it, but he didn't. He passes away, and the former wife gets his entire retirement proceeds. The new wife is not very happy about this. And so that was the unintended consequences of not planning ahead and keeping these documents up to date. So you want to make sure that whatever changes in your life, think, okay, how does it affect my will? How does it affect my power of attorney? How does it affect my property, the care for my children, you know, the legacy I want to leave for my church, for my causes, all the kind of things that are part of the plan. You want to make sure it's what I would advise a business or corporation. They do strategic planning every year, typically in the fall of the year. So I say, how has life changed? What adjustments do we have to make? We have to do that for our personal lives as well.
Hey, Maurice,
Yes, sir.
I know you said last time that if you don't have a plan, the state has a plan for you. So I was thinking about that when Sister Lewis, what she said. So if you are leaving something to somebody and something happens to them, and then, you know, so what happens? Does the state take over at that point?
It could take over, Bob. That's a really good question. So I asked in the first session this trick question: who has a will? Who doesn't have a will? The answer to the question is everybody has a will. In North Carolina, it's called the Intestate Statute. If you die without a will, then the state of North Carolina has a design on how your property is to be divided up. And the way I've never met anybody who looked at the state's layout and said, that's exactly how I want my property divided. Nobody likes it. Nobody likes it. So you write your own. So in estate planning, whether it's your will or whether it's the intestate statute, the order of inheritance work this way. So someone passes away, and then you decided that, or the statute decided that your property is going to go to your children. So we would take a look at the person who passed away, and we're going to look down and say, are there children? Okay, there's 2 children, so they get their estate. One of the children passed away, predeceased the person who died. They had children, which are grandchildren, so their share now goes down to the grandchildren. If one of the grandchildren passed away and they had children, then it goes down to that child. So there's an order and way it proceeds down through the generations. If there are no children, then whatever you have in your inheritance, it goes up the line to the parents. If there are no parents, then it goes now down to the parents' children, which are your siblings. If one of your siblings has passed away, now it goes down to their child, which is your nieces or nephews, or great-grand nieces and nephews. So if you have no siblings, you have no children, your parents have passed away, now it goes up to your great-grandparents. They're not here. Now it goes to your great-grand aunts and uncles. If you run out of family members, then the state of North Carolina will do what is called escheat. The state of North Carolina will take possession of your estate. That estate is sent to the state treasurer's office, given 7 years for someone in the family to show up and say, hey, you forgot about me. No one takes a claim, then that money goes to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And they use it for whatever they want. So if someone passes away without any heirs, without any legacy plan, or any provision that goes to a charity or something, then you've hopefully helped a Carolina student with education in the future.
So why is it the University of North Carolina? We have other universities.
You didn't hear that online. The question was asked, so why University of North Carolina? And we have a brother here said because they're good stewards. That's as good an answer as I can give. Any other questions? Any questions online? Anyone? All right, terrific. You have been a gracious audience. Thank you for being with me today and having this conversation. We want you to have the legacy that you intend for yourself. And one of the values of this is just going through the exercise and thinking about what do I want my life to mean to future generations or to institutions or to the church or the community? What do I want it to mean? I'd like to believe that we all want to feel, meaningful. So what do you want it to be? In the example of, $2 million, that's on a high end. You might decide, I can accomplish all my legacy for $25,000. There's no judgment. There's no rule. It's what you want it to be. And if you decide what you want your legacy to be, what it to mean, the people you want to protect, to love and secure, and a plan is created to do that, to consider your legacy secure. And you've accomplished what it is that you wanted to accomplish with it. And to the extent that we can be helpful to you, happy to be so. Just let my information, I think, is on the flyers and the information been provided to you. Happy to have a conversation with you. And if you just have a question for me, say, people call me sometimes. If I call that lawyer, he's going to turn on the billable hours clock and start charging me for it. Doesn't cost you to have a conversation. And I love having the conversation, because then if I don't know the answer to one of your questions, I just learned something I can help a future client with. And so that's a blessing to me. So thank you all for your time today.
Good stuff, good stuff. And you know what? When Maurice expresses that he's not going to be harassing you and trying, he really means it. When he was here last time, there were so many people that went up afterwards and he assisted. And he's someone who's very humble. He's not, you all, let me tell you this. I read his book. It's a very simple book. And I have children, I say children, they've seen that much. I have youth that on every Sunday we read a chapter, because it's like, he has a legacy, and I'm trying to help them to understand that you have that legacy as well. And you can get good information from someone who is sharing that information. And so with that, make sure that you're doing what you need to do. Because when he says he wants to help, he really wants to help. And that's who he is. And he has a big heart. And I'm just excited, and I'm thankful that he took time out of his schedule to come today and to share this valuable information that we all need. And so you have your handouts, take them, share it with other people, because I know you know someone who doesn't have a will, but just like you said, we all have a will. It may not just be the one that we want to help and how we want our legacy to end up. And also on the back of your handout in the yellow section, his information is down there. Passed out the business cards that I had remaining from last time, but you still have his information in that yellow box. And just remember that your life is a legacy. Your children are a legacy. Your faith that you have in Christ Jesus is a legacy. And we are always talking about spreading the gospel. We want to share our faith, but we also want to share financial information that we gain today down to generations and generations and generations, so they can say, my great-great-great-grandmama, T-Ma, Harper, from Harper down the road, this is who she was. And all I see is the pictures of her, but this is what she and Pepe left behind for us down the road. So think about, what do you want your legacy to mean? Start with a vision and make sure you're getting those things in order that you need to have in order, so that when God calls us home, you and your family are all prepared. So thank you, Maurice. Let's give him a clap. All right. So Elder Dunn is going to come up and close us out in prayer.
What you say?
UNC.
No.
Uh-oh.
NC State, man.
Yes, he said, my bad.
I'm gonna have to work on that one. I have to figure out why everything's going to UNC. But yeah. Thank you, Maurice. Appreciate it. Great information. All right, let's pray. Truly, God, we thank you for this seminar. We thank you for Brother Maurice Smith coming out, his preparation, God, everything that was shared, God. And we just pray, God, that now you would touch our hearts, touch our minds, God, and all the information we receive, God, that we'd be able to digest it and think about it some more, God, and that you would lead us, God, to be living a legacy, God, to model those things you would have us to model, God. We've learned things here today, how we can be good stewards of everything that belongs to you and manage those things, God. But also, God, we never want to forget the legacy we have in Jesus Christ and sharing him with the dying world, God. So definitely with our family and our church family and our community, God. Help us, God, to never be shy to share the gospel, the good news of Jesus. And we're just so thankful today. May you get all the honor, all the glory, and may we continue to reach out and gain more wisdom and understanding, God, and about what we should do and how we should do it, when we should do it. So don't let us sit on this, but let us get active and really think about, before the time comes and we haven't planned anything, we haven't prepared. So help us, God, give us that wisdom and discernment. And we give you all the honor and glory. Give us safe travels. We thank everybody online, everybody here today. And may you receive this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.